we're very happy to have you tonight with us. We wanted to address the topic of Bitcoin as a whole, ranging from the technical side to the economical and societal impact of it. Because by digging deeper into your CV, it's very interesting the fact that you are actually, as far as understood, a developer. You got into Bitcoin because of technology and then the understanding you had as a developer. And I also think you wrote a book about it
Hmm.
with some tech part. And then as time went by, you started to do some more writings, public talks, and education. Can you tell us what brought you to shift from the technical coding development towards the educational task in Bitcoin? Why did you do it? And how is going to look for you for the future with your role into this ecosystem?
Yeah, so I mean, I started on the technical side just because there weren't too many people, especially during the block size wars of 2017, that were really explaining what was going on. I found an audience for my content because, the block size stuff and SegWit, people didn't really understand it. And because I'm a developer, I could explain a lot of that stuff in, rather, simple language, I guess. And people really like that. And that's how my article started. But as if you remember during the block size wars, it got very political, and there were a lot of people that were, sort of saying things that weren't true, and trying to make things out to be a certain way so that they could get support for their side and so on. And for me, that was sort of like the genesis of why I started writing more about some of the other stuff around Bitcoin, because a lot of these people would just, straight up, well, not exactly lie, but like spin things in a way that made it sound like, a block size increase wasn't a big deal and stuff like that. And I get why they did that, but it was important for me to lay out what was actually going on and why all of that, all of the technical stuff mattered, but also why some of the economic aspects were very important as well. The ability to sort of say no to an upgrade is an enormous feature, and it's at the heart of what Bitcoin is all about. But there were a bunch of companies that were trying to make it sound like, oh, you should just increase the block size for us, and we represent all of the users because they're all on our platforms and so on. And it was important to make that sort of like connection between the technical and the economic, and because ultimately running your own node and being decentralized is a technical argument, but it's also an economic one. And to understand the economic aspects of it was extremely important. And this is why to this day, I'm still upset at a lot of those people that were trying to, manipulate Bitcoin to their ends, and they're acting like they're, pro Bitcoin or something, even though they tried to destroy it just like 7 years ago, and they haven't apologized for it. So, that's where I sort of like made the transition into the economic aspect. And the more I did reading on economic aspects, I started to approach some of the topics from more of a moral perspective. Certainly writing the Little Bitcoin book with some of the HRF folks was a big part of that. But then getting into the Christian side with Thank God for Bitcoin, and then like more of the regulatory side, it just all sort of happened, and as a result of exploring the economics, and that was a part that was important to articulate, particularly connecting it to the technical changes that were being proposed.
Yeah, so the block size war acted as a catalyst for your personal development. All of those arguments was beneficial for your transition, as I understood. That's really entrenches with another question I wanted to pose to you. It's like we, given that you are a technical person, in first instance, and then all of these development layers of Bitcoin. So we all agree that we have to scale Bitcoin to scale in layers, but there are some proponents of ossification of the main chain. Do you think the two things can coexist, and how do you imagine? And are you in favor of this ossification, or it can be dangerous for the protocol?
I'm part of, I think my position would be best described as like team slow and steady. And if you haven't read that article from AJ Towns, I highly encourage you to go and read it. Because from a technical perspective, you really don't want to be making changes very quickly without really understanding the full implications. Because it's people's money that you are, playing with. This isn't a website where you're doing like an A/B test to see which image performs better or something like that. This is people's money. And if you screw up something, you might screw up the entire thing. So it's very important to take things slow and make sure you get things right. The thing about a soft fork of some kind is that unless you put some sort of like timeout mechanism or something at the beginning, once you soft fork, it's a hard fork to roll that back. So there really isn't it's kind of a one-way function. You have to be very careful about the stuff that you do. So I get why there are people that are super excited about covenants or something else, and they want to they make the argument, oh, this is going to help us scale or whatever. But we've heard all those arguments before. One of the, I think, lessons of some of the things that happened in the past is that things don't actually pan out the way that you want them to. So, for example, there was a bit called Bit 37, and this was basically a way to do SPV, simplified payment verification. People to check their their transaction without having to run a full node, and without you would have to communicate with a full node, and they give you information and stuff like that. And Mike Hearn kind of pushed it through. I think Matt Corallo worked on it, but ultimately it didn't get used that much, right? And I've talked to like David Harding, who writes the Bitcoin OpTech newsletter about this. He's like, like just run a node for a week and see how many requests for SPV you get. Yeah, I bet you it's going to be like one or none. The thing is that feature was something of a dud, right? And there are many reasons for that. Among others, the fact that like the server can lie to you, and you can like DDoS the server and all this other stuff, which is why like ultimately we ended up doing compact block filters, and to enable that. And it's actually done way more rationally instead of, hey, the SPV is mentioned in the white paper, therefore we should implement it this way, which was ultimately the argument that got Bit 37 through. Yeah, you have to be really careful about that stuff, because in a sense that code has to be maintained forever. I mean, they did deprecate it, and thankfully it's not consensus critical or whatever. But this is what you're playing with. You really have to be very, very careful. So say we put in some sort of covenants opcode, and then someone figures out some crazy sort of smart contract within it that locks things up in some weird way that makes it very difficult to unlock or something, and people lose a bunch of money or something like that. Like that's not a situation that you want to put yourself in. You like we haven't really even explored the stuff that we already have. Just like Schnorr signatures alone, gives you all kinds of abilities from a multi-sig perspective and so on, that we like no wallet that I know has really fully implemented. None of these wallets support Frost, for example. A few support music maybe, but there's other stuff within Schnorr signatures that hasn't really been explored at all yet. There's something called Arctic that lets you do deterministic nonces and things like that. There's also hasn't been explored that much either. BitVM is just like the tip of the iceberg. There's like 6 different proposals for using Taproot in a particular way to make, some kind of side chain possibly, or some sort of very complicated program that runs, and you have punishment mechanisms and so on. I mean, let's explore all of that first before we start adding new stuff, because we don't really understand all of the interactions of what can happen, say if we include like a covenants opcode. Now I get that a lot of developers are excited about it. I get that, I mean, this is kind of what you end up with as an engineer is you get excited about new features, you always want new toys and so on, but again, this is money. This isn't a website. This isn't, some app on your phone or something like that where you're constantly having to, give new features to users and so on. This is money, and the thing that you really want to make sure of is that it's secure for everyone. Are there like possible ways to do layer 2 that are more interesting once you have a couple of these, covenant things? Absolutely. I mean, L2 is pretty exciting. Even stuff like state chains and opening lightning channels without any on-chain transaction and stuff like that. There's all kinds of interesting ways in which you can do some of these things. It's not entirely clear that you need all of these things right now. Even stuff like OpCat, it's possible you could do someone could figure out some clever way to do something, say on Taproot, and let's see if there's uptake first before we continue with that. Like this, urgency to get things in now is completely antithetical to the Bitcoin way. It's people's money you're talking about. You got to be very careful.
Yeah. So now, as in 2017, caution first. No, it's very clear. Can say I agree. And let's talk about. I don't know if Alessandro has any question.
Just want to say thanks, Jimmy, for this description. In 2017, I was just joining Bitcoin, so I was seeing just a speculative asset, and then I sold after the crash. I think, as most of the people in the first wave. So great to see the description of someone who was really deep into the block size war and the technological part. I agree that this urgency to do something or to change something is not only in the technological part, but the human being is urgent to do something. Also, as Bitcoiners, we are saying buy and hold. Very simple, boring strategy. Buy and hold. That's it. And people say, "Oh no, that's too boring. We need to do something. We need to update." And also for Bitcoin, actually, that the fact that there is not been hacked so far and is keeping appreciating value, is doing the Bitcoin thing. Like there will be more adoption. For sure, there will be changes, but it's not that we need to change constantly. And my question I have before Francesco, you go for your question is: do you foresee in the future another situation like the block size war, or it will be more someone want to do something with Bitcoin and Bitcoin community will say mostly no, like with ordinance?
Yeah, I mean, the gut feeling I get is mostly people are going to be saying no, and the community was much smaller back in 2017, and the thing about consensus is that you need to get the agreement of everybody, and it's always easier to get the agreement of everybody if the number of people in that everybody is smaller. And that was certainly the case in 2013, and 2014, 15, 16, even 17, and even up to SegWit. But the community is significantly bigger now, and everyone needs to agree to make these changes. Now, this is very frustrating to a lot of developers that have been working on these features for many, many years. I mean, Jeremy Rubin's been working on Opsy TV for, I don't know, 6 or 7 years or something like that. And I get his frustration. I get the frustration of even people like Paul Stork, who's been working on drive chains since like 2015 or something like that. They're almost 10 years for him. I get their frustration. But the thing is, you really have to get consensus, and consensus is changing as the community grows. And so, my like, just from a game theory perspective, you know even a small minority of people that really don't want to change can ultimately kind of block those changes. And this is what makes Bitcoin so powerful, is that it is not easy to change. And people might be thinking, oh, that sucks. We can't get these features. We have to be competing with these other things. That is totally the wrong way to look at it. That's true for tech. That's true for a website. That's true for an app. That's true for software that you're running and you're constantly having to compete or whatever. But this is money, and money is way better when it doesn't change. Part of a major part of the value proposition of Bitcoin is that what the Bitcoin that you have many years from now is ultimately very, very similar or the same as the Bitcoin that you have now. If that changes, then it makes it much harder to plan. This is the problem with the dollar, with fiat currency, and with all of these altcoins as well, is that you have no assurance that it's going to ultimately remain the same. And that's the problem, is with savings, you want things to stay the same and not change. With the dollar, it's constantly changing because the supply keeps increasing, sometimes in very significant ways, like it did in 2020. So I would submit to you that this idea that you need to compete and do things like Ethereum or something like that is absolutely the wrong frame. You're thinking that this is a technology. It is, but it's also money, and it's very important that money not change. That you give people a tool to plan for the future, and if you don't have consensus, then it doesn't change. And just based on that, I really don't think there will be that many changes in the future. I think a lot of the changes will happen on other layers as these second layers themselves compete with one another, and that's the way it should be. And I'm sure we'll be surprised by the things that people come up with. I mean, even stuff like state chains, which were completely theoretical like 4 years ago. Mercury layer is doing something with it and trying to make that all work out and seeing how the market takes to it, because there are ways to open a Lightning channel without having an on-chain transaction, in which case it's kind of free, right? And it's like, oh, okay, that's an interesting interaction of different layer 2 technologies that could be very useful. Could do something similar on Liquid as well, where there's no on-chain transaction on the main chain. There's a transaction on Liquid, but that opens up a channel, and now you can spend Lightning through it. So you get kind of interesting scalability things as these things get discovered or figured out, and people start programming them. But what you need is competition. You need a lot of these developers and companies just trying new stuff and seeing what works for people. And it's that interaction between the market and developers and companies that makes the whole thing go.
Yeah, so basically, yes, no harm first rule, don't harm, that's correct. Talking about harm and the perception of Bitcoin and the world, and going more into the philosophical side of it and societal side. We have in El Salvador, Bitcoin is working very well, reshaping the society, giving power to the people. Even Salvadorians who live abroad here in Europe, talk to him in Europe, talk to them, and they say, "Wow, Bukele is a fantastic president of Bitcoin," and they are 60 years old and couldn't believe it. And they don't even live there. But yeah, it's really staggering. But nobody in the Western media, of course, highlights it as a success, because it cannot be a success, and for them. And until what time is this approach from the Western media going to take place? At this moment, currently, we have Salvador and versus the IMF, and the media on the IMF side, of course. And do you think it's going to be like that for a long time, or there could be Bitcoin could take other routes to influence the Western society where we live in, and to show its properties to the first world population, or it's just a pain it has to pass, and then how do you see it?
Yeah, I mean, if you look at the mainstream media in almost every country, they're all entirely globalist, right? And they've gone down this very weird route where they're essentially promoting globalist agendas very explicitly and not giving any um, airtime to the other side of the issue. A lot of the nationalistic stuff doesn't get reported at all. So it's no surprise that they're doing essentially the same thing in El Salvador, where all the globalists report only negative news about El Salvador when they can. But if you look at sort of like the alternative news sites, the so-called right wing or whatever, yeah, they're saying a lot of good things about it, and they're seeing that Bitcoin is a part of that. Now, it's not quite as big a part of the Salvadoran economy as it could be. I expect that to change and get better as time goes on. But that is like a reality that you can't deny, and you go there, and it's very obvious that the policies and sort of like getting out from under the thumb of the IMF has been wonderful for El Salvador. There's a lot more building. There's a lot more businesses starting. A lot of things are getting cleaned up. It's becoming like really nice. There's just a lot of good things happening there, and I think that's kind of undeniable. Whereas in Western countries, you have a lot of violence, right? Like rapes and theft all over the place. And illegal immigration and things like that are really hurting a lot of these communities, and none of that gets reported by the mainstream. So a lot of people are using alternative media. I'm sure you know about Tucker Carlson, and the numbers he's doing on Twitter is just like millions and millions of views, sometimes like hundreds of millions, very quickly after he publishes something. And it's uh, the old media is going away. I think that's fairly clear, because they are clearly for the globalist agenda. They are totally for fiat money and all of the control that brings to the global elites. And as that starts to crumble, I think people go to other news sources that have been right in the past. I mean, this is ultimately how Bitcoin maximalists won, because we just kept being right over and over and over again. That's a shitcoin, and that's going to go down, and there's going to be exploits on this, and ultimately that's how you build credibility, is over time, when you've been right on a lot of stuff, people start giving you credit. They might not like you at first because they don't want it to be true, but if you've been right like 9 times out of 10, like at some point people start listening. So I think that's what's going to happen with Bitcoin and El Salvador and all of this stuff, where the globalists sort of have control right now, but all of that is temporary. They can't keep it going because it relies on this fiat Ponzi. And ultimately, I think Bitcoin wins because it's the better money, and it'll be obvious to anybody, in like 5-10 years time, hey, like the Bitcoiners have been right all along about inflation, about like these really stupid policies, and the IMF, and all of these countries that are getting out from under debt, and We shouldn't be listening to these government economists that keep telling us that we need to, give everybody more money, or essentially steal, or listen to the IMF and so on. I think that's where it's going. But like the legacy media, all of these, globalist media types all over the world, I don't think they ever come around. They're rent seekers, and they rely on government largesse ultimately to survive. And when that goes away, I think there will be budget crises in a lot of these places as you enter into hyperinflation and so on. People will be looking for alternative means of consuming news, and certainly for young people, that's already the case, where they don't look at the traditional media anymore. They're getting their news from Instagram or TikTok or Twitter and so on. So it's all ripe for disruption. But I don't think we turn them.
Yeah. Alessandro, any comment?
Yes, so a great comment on this as well, Jimmy. One comment on this. I think for me, will mostly will be the price appreciation that will convince people to pay attention to Bitcoin. I see every bull market, every time Bitcoin is doing plus 10K, plus 15K, there is a portion of people who move from skeptics to in favor, or from skeptics to neutral, or from neutral to in favor. Likely, these people who are still against, a part of the people who work for the maybe economic system, they still think that the economic system is the right one. But for the retail, not common people, I think the problem is for them the price is too low still. Once we reach maybe 80, 100, 120K, 150K, then they will pay attention much more, and maybe many more. They will even many more people will be interested in your interviews, in your books. Do you see a similar path that for many we have to wait? I totally agree. We have been right the whole time. It's just a matter of time for people to realize. And once we will have a higher and higher price, the more and more people will at least pay attention, and then maybe some of them will study Bitcoin. Do you see the same?
Yeah, I mean, I think this has been sort of the adoption curve of Bitcoin, is that every bull market you get a new group of Bitcoin maximalists essentially, and then they hold through a whole cycle, and now their friends see them and they're like, "What did you do differently? I wish I got in when you first told me about it." And you make new holders, and this the thing about Bitcoin, is that time is on our side. The longer it lasts and the longer it proves itself, the more people can't deny it. Back in like 2013 or something, so many people thought it was like some sort of tulip bubble or whatever. And I would argue against them, like, no, it's not, blah, blah, blah. But, like very few people make that tulip analogy anymore, because it's gone up and down like 6 times. And each time it does this, this thing, they can't just like dismiss it as a tulip bubble anymore. And that's a beautiful thing. The fact that it's not easily dismissible anymore means that people have to put Bitcoin into their worldview somehow. And at that point, they have to do something about it. They either follow what seems rational, which is, okay, this has been around for 15 years now.
Yes, we have seen these cycles. What do you think? They will remain? They will keep cycles and cycles, or it could be that this cycle will be different, or this or the next cycle. Explaining why. Now that with this cycle maybe arrive 150, 200K, 250. At this time, is not anymore a small thing, as it has been 4 years ago or 8 years. A small thing, not a small thing comparing to the 400 or 900 trillion global market. If we reach maybe 4, 5 trillion, then it will become really global, and likely we will get also the adoption from many, firstly many institutions, thanks also to the ETF, but then many retailers. At this point, do you think there could be still, technically could always be, but it's likely that we will have a crash of 70, 80%, as we have done as we have seen in 2018 or 2022, or maybe it will be smoother and it will do what Bitcoin has created to be done, like a store of value, slow appreciating over time, with some swings, but not anymore these crashes. What do you think will happen in the next cycles?
Yeah, the one scenario that I don't see like is one where we go up slow and steady. That's not how this works. If you think it's not going to be volatile, or you're hoping that it's not going to be volatile, I have bad news for you. That's not going to happen. And the reason is this: if you have a slowly increasing asset, then everybody piles into it. This is how it works in a fiat economy. So you're talking about all these prices in fiat terms in the US dollar. Thing is, the US dollar is a changing unit of account. So it's as a $1 as a fraction of the whole was worth 30% more 4 years ago, because they printed like $5 trillion or whatever. So you have to be very careful about like putting numbers and saying, oh, okay, once we reach this plateau, then these people will get in, or it'll be permanent or something like that. Because ultimately the thing that you're measuring with is a changing yardstick. It's you can't really measure anything with the dollar very well, especially in an inflationary economy. Now, like, is this cycle going to be different? And well, first of all, I think volatility is here to stay. That's really the only way that the risk and volatility, like the upside and volatility, go together. There is no slowly rising risk-free asset. You have volatile assets that have some risk profile, or that has significant upside, or you have completely flat or slightly decreasing assets that have very little risk, which like money market funds are like. So it's two sides of the same coin. So you're not going to see this slow and steady, like increase, I don't know, 10 grand every month or something like that. And that's not going to happen. But what is this cycle going to be like? I have no idea. And that's something uh, that is very hard to predict, because there's so many factors. Not We do know the Bitcoin side. We know the supply schedule of Bitcoin, but what we don't know is the demand side, and that's how price is determined, is both with supply and demand. The demand side depends entirely on people and the perception that it has, plus all of the central bank money printing and so on. The last couple of years, things have been actually kind of tight. The central bank monetary policy has been to raise interest rates, so there's less money printed, there's less loans going out into the economy, and that ultimately means, okay, there's less just overall money. There's been slight contraction in the M2, for example, in a lot of countries. And that means that the demand side isn't going to be as much because of central bank policy. Now, that policy continues, and say they implement real austerity or something like that, it's possible like Bitcoin stays at this level for a while. But if they start printing again, maybe because there's an election coming, or there's some panic, or there's some war that they need to fund or something like that, then it's entirely possible that Bitcoin goes to the moon tomorrow. Who knows? But it's a complicated equation and it's very hard to predict, because it depends on individual action and the perception that each person has. Now, it's affected by the policies of the people in power right now. But generally, the more responsible they are, the slower Bitcoin goes up. The less responsible they are, the quicker Bitcoin goes up. But like how quickly it goes up, or how fast it becomes sort of like the monetary asset that replaces these things, it's hard for me to say. And anyone that tells you this is going to happen at this point or whatever, they're just all speculating, and you really don't know. I would encourage you, if you do have these questions, to not really think about it that way. Really like the mantra, stay humble, stack sats. Like, that's the way to go, right? Like, you know where the end game is, which is ultimately that Bitcoin is the hardest asset and it will take over. You don't know exactly when that's going to happen. Just in the meantime, stack sats and work hard. There's no need to be playing these speculative games of, oh, maybe I should leverage here and try to make more money or whatever. Just provide value to other people. Use that money to buy Bitcoin. Don't do these like stupid games that'll end up with you having zero. That's what I would have to say.
Totally agree on the strategy. Sorry, Francesco. Then totally agree on the strategy. For me, I'm also I follow the Bitcoin price, but it's not changing the strategy at all. Yes, I'm all in, all in the way I have to earn more than what I spend, and the rest is saved in Bitcoin, and it will be for buy and hold. It's also is mostly for new joiners because whenever we join, we discuss with new people. For sure, we will discuss about Bitcoin is money, which are the properties, what will be the world in a Bitcoin standard world. But they also would like to know our opinion on where the market will go. But thanks to share your opinion, Francesco.
Well, the reason why they say that, right, is because they're anxious about when to get in. Because when you're a newbie, you want to buy some Bitcoin. You want to sort of feel like you're getting a bargain, and this is unfortunately a habit that a lot of people pick up in the fiat world. It's like, okay, I want to get that item when it's on sale, right? Like that's sort of the mentality that people have. And again, that is the wrong mentality. This is a savings technology. What you want to do is to be in the market as long as possible. It's not timing the market, it's time in the market. The longer you are in it, the better it is for you ultimately, rather than timing things. Because you get into timing, then it's really kind of trying to earn money by timing things and playing sort of like these zero-sum games. That is not a good place for your mind. That is not a good place for you, like as like a person in Bitcoin, because ultimately what you're going to end up doing is trading a lot, trying to earn money in a zero-sum game, and inevitably you'll go up against people that have way more experience than you at this, and you either get very lucky, in which case you're going to be profligate with your spending, or you go to zero, in which case you've lost your stack. So try to get them out of that mentality of, all right, when do I time the market? Is it a good time to buy now? It's always a good time to buy. The thing is, you have to have a 5 to 10 year horizon in order to make that work. So instead of trying to time the market and being a trader, which is the instinct that a lot of people get into, largely taught by the fiat economy of sales and stuff like that, get into a mentality of saving. And any time is a good time to save. And that's been true as long as you have an appreciating current savings vehicle and not one that is constantly depreciating.
Centralization of the ETFs or all of the instruments, whatever, and the regulation, which because the centralized entity wants to regulate, they don't want to go to private keys. They want to centralize everything. So do you see any common ground? Do you see any risk for the perception people of a Bitcoin freedom, sense of citizenship to be overshadowed by the centralized approach of governmental bodies, entities, which they're going to try to regulate for sure Bitcoin more and more in the future?
Yeah, I mean, I definitely see sort of like nation state oppression on Bitcoin, or at least self-custody Bitcoin that is coming. But ultimately, like these ETFs and stuff, thank God that it took them so long to get there, because in a sense, most Bitcoin is in the private hands of individuals. You look at the amount of Bitcoin that the ETFs all have, and combined, it's like less than 1 million. And on all of the exchanges, if you combine them, it's less than 2 million. That's less than 10% of all Bitcoin. Whereas the other 90%, I mean, obviously a lot of that is lost or whatever, but a significant amount of that is in private hands, and it's in somebody's cold storage or whatever. So I see that as a very good sign that even if you have ETFs grow a lot, I mean, price-wise, they're going to have to push up Bitcoin price significantly in order to get more Bitcoin on their balance sheet, and that's just how the market works because of the absolute scarcity of Bitcoin. So I don't see a lot of these ETFs, like getting a majority of Bitcoin anytime soon. And in fact, I don't think they'll ever get there. I'd be very surprised by that. Now, is it possible for governments to try to ban Bitcoin self-custody and say, hey, like you have to buy through an ETF or something like that? They could certainly try, but the beauty of Bitcoin is that it's, first of all, pseudonymous, and second, the people can vote with their feet and go somewhere else, and where their capital is more or isn't treated as badly. And I can see that happening, especially in places like El Salvador, where the government is very friendly towards Bitcoiners, and they'll make it so that you get zero capital gains tax or something, in which case people are going to move there and invest there and make things better there instead of at the places that are sort of treating you like crap. So, I see that as the future, and the game theory works out in such a way that, it's ultimately going to be better for the jurisdictions that are friendly towards Bitcoin rather than the ones that are hostile. Ultimately it's good for Bitcoin.
No, for sure. But what matters is the perception, because in my experience, I've never seen anybody who has been into Bitcoin for 5, 6 years, 7 years, which ultimately doesn't hold even a part of Bitcoin with these private keys. I was thinking that is going to be the case in the future for the new joiners, or they will just give up on self-custody for some reason. Or to me, it's impossible, but I want to know your opinion on this. Is self-custody for everybody or not?
Yeah, it's a good question. I mean, my gut feeling is that what will happen is you'll get sort of like more community-centered banking, and this is traditionally like kind of normal, right? Like, and I don't know about you guys, but I custody coins for my relatives that aren't comfortable with self-custody, and that's okay because they know me, they trust me, and we have a good relationship and so on. Some multi-sig version of that in some sort of like almost community banking kind of style setup, I think will become more normal, where people won't be self-custodying exactly, but it'll be in a community of people that they trust already, where they already have a lot of good relationships and so on. And you add something like multi-sig to that, it's very hard for someone to just like go and run away with the money. So I suspect that's where we'll end up, because not everyone is technical, not everyone will be able to do that. It's possible that the UX gets to the point where people feel comfortable, self-custodying $100,000 worth of Bitcoin in their house. But it's mentally kind of difficult to have that much responsibility, and it's kind of scary for people. The government has been taking away that sort of risk for every asset for a very long time. So most people don't haven't exercised those muscles of like responsibility and so on. But some sort of communal one, I think, is a lot more attractive to people. I mean, you're not going to have grandma getting a cold card and doing that. I mean, I'm sure some grandmas will, but not every grandma. But you certainly could have, maybe a younger relative or a bunch of younger relatives that are using multi-sig and, keeping grandma's Bitcoin safe for her and helping her do all those transactions so she's not phished and loses all her money, like to some web form that says enter your 12-word private seed phrase or whatever. So that's where I think it'll go. And who knows? Maybe this is what Fetty becomes or something like that, where a lot of the money is kept in sort of like a very small community bank or family bank or something like that, and it interoperates with other Fediments or something, and you can pay through it, and it's instant and private and all that. I don't know. The future is open, and I don't know what technologies become popular or emerge or whatever. But my gut feeling is that it trends that way rather, and it's basically something in between, complete self custody and centralized players that are like kind of faceless. Something in between where it's like community based.
No, it totally now makes sense. And never thought about it, but thank you for having brought about this idea, community banking, because I heard a lot of stories coming from African or rural places where this is the norm. So it looks like it's a human soul, and it's to trust somebody, and that they do it in their circle of their society, especially in the rural areas. So that is a very likely option. Sandro, any comment on that, or go ahead?
No, good description on this as well. I think many people will not also not feel to be responsible, at least at the beginning. On my personal opinion, I think firstly, thanks to the describe of this community, I also community style. I also think Bitcoin will incentivize also the institutions who will own Bitcoin for people to be behaving in a better way. Also, Hal Finney was saying 10 years ago, we will need kind of Bitcoin banks. There will not be banks like now, and they will be the one who will survive are the ones who are behaving better. So not fractional reserve banking and not playing with money of people. Do you see this also an option as well, that Bitcoin is also influencing the institutions?
Yeah, possibly. I mean, the thing about a lot of these banking institutions is that they make their money off of loans, right? It's they need to be constantly loaning money, and if they loan more money than they have, then they're insolvent essentially. That's what bankrupt really means. But like, can they make it work by lending the amount that they have? I mean, if you just run the numbers, right? Like say you have $10 million in deposits, and you're paying maybe like 2% interest to those 10 million, and you're lending out that 10 million at like 4% interest or something. The difference is 2%, and 2% of 10 million is like 200,000. That's like not nearly enough to run an operation like a bank, at least the way it exists today. It just doesn't work. The only reason it works right now is because of fractional reserve banking. You take 10 million in deposits and you lend out like 100 million or $1 billion, and at those levels, then now it's like, oh, okay, $2 million or $20 million, somewhere in between those two. Now you can run a bank. But like, if you're doing full reserve banking, just the money isn't there, and it's not a very attractive proposition, which is why I think it becomes more like a family situation. And maybe you pay one of your family members to like keep that going, especially if you have a big extended family or whatever. But it's not like we traditionally think of banking as this very rich employment thing. But you run the numbers, it's not. It never has been under a full reserve system. So that yeah, I don't know if you'll necessarily see a lot of institutional adoption, simply because the institutions are way too big and they have a lot of mouths to feed, and most of them aren't going to have that much to do. Maybe this is where they end up, but they're going to have like massive rounds of layoffs and stuff. I mean, like a company, a bank like Citibank employs like 200,000 people, and they have less assets under management than Tether, who employs like 50 people. So you can run things a lot more efficiently. Just they've never had that incentive to. And I mean, you're just going to like, you may get institutional adoption, but like there's a limit to what they can do because they're not going to be the Cantillon winners anymore. So I suspect that a lot of these institutions will die first, and then new institutions will arise. Maybe it's more community focused or family focused or something like that. But yeah, the way they exist right now, I just don't see them continuing because there's not enough sort of juice to squeeze from the fiat games that they play.
Totally agree. Thanks for the comparison here. In case probably it will be your community or regional banks. Also, Dean Amos in his last book, Principle of Economics, said the banking we need a banking system, but they need to do two. They have two actions to do. One is own deposit for those who don't want to do self custody, and the other be the intermediary point between credit and debt. So yeah, there would be many less people they are employed now. And making a comparison, it will be also with the form of government that we have. If we have a government who runs in a Bitcoin standard, we will need much less government because many more things will be private. So we can also say maybe Bitcoin is bringing the functions at what they really need to do. It's the fiat system that is blowing in making all these institutions bigger and bigger in things that they should not have power to. Do you see as well this comparison? Also for the government.
Yeah, absolutely. The fiat system really bloats a lot of particular rent-seeking jobs, and like it's not any more obvious than banking. It's crazy to me that Tether makes like $5 billion a year, and they have 50 employees, whereas like Citibank has 200,000 employees, and they barely make any money, relatively speaking.
Will try to exploit it, to use it, take advantage of it for their own purposes, and then they will go ahead with that same fiat narrative we talked before. But Bitcoin is also represents also a unique cultural movement. I mean, it teaches freedom. It has the ability to merge, to bring together both people from different political backgrounds in the name of freedom. What do you think about this political impact of Bitcoin in our societies, and how this narrative is going to hold, or hopefully even get better in the future as a societal impact?
Politically, I see. First of all, there's a lot of voters that are becoming more or less single issue voters as a result of Bitcoin, and it's not a small number. At least from what I'm hearing about, like the Bitcoin lobby is making some headway into these politicians' offices. So yeah, they have to cater to the many of us that are saving in it. So yeah, I see that as a positive thing because ultimately that undermines fiat money and it undermines their ability to sort of spend on weird stuff like wars and programs that essentially do nothing. So politically, it's sort of like a Trojan horse that will undermine the very basis of the finances that these politicians are used to. I don't know how many of them really understand that, but ultimately, I think it's good for Bitcoin because it'll ensure that they more or less have to become more responsible because Bitcoin is always going to be there as the alternative for people that don't want to be in fiat money, and that choice will become very stark in like the next 10 years or so, where people either keep it in the dollar or Bitcoin, and it's okay. Well, if I keep it in the dollar, they're starting this new war, or they're going to spend it on this. I don't like the prospects, so I'm going to go with Bitcoin. I think that's a choice that way more people make going forward. So politically, I mean, it's an interesting issue. I don't pretend to know how it'll play out, but the fact that we have influence is a very good thing.
Yes, absolutely. It has once people see, they cannot unsee anymore. I think maybe one cycle could be not enough for some, but definitely after two cycles and their life improved, and the old strategy always been validated as effective. Um, that's the confidence point where people can empower themselves in their thinking process, in their freedom against maybe every kind of narrative, because the monetary aspect is so powerful that I think the majority of people they just fake to not fake comply, but there are a good slice of people who just people who trust the system, but there are people who just comply with the system, but they are not really convinced. But they just go ahead with the flow because it's the wisest for them, because they don't know there is the Bitcoin instrument to break free. And but when they will find out, and that will be, they found out that will be beneficial for them, well, it will be very easy for them to go ahead with the freedom path of Bitcoin and maybe become Bitcoiners. So I'm really bullish also on the political side of it and the cultural impact. I don't know if Alessandro has a comment on that, or was I have the last question after that? No. Okay. So my last question would be on we have seen a period where the ESG narrative was big. That was before the war on Ukraine, and then everything faded away, and we had some also shift in the narrative of Bitcoin. We had some World Economic Forum spot about saying Bitcoin is good for the environment and so on. And so 180 shift happened very quickly. And also the percentage of green energy used to mine Bitcoin rose. We are currently at 58%, I think. Do you think that percentage is enough to validate Bitcoin to the eyes, even to the most stubborn parts of the political framework picture, or there is still we are still not there. We are not there yet to convince the parliament, this word, of the good incentives behind and make Bitcoin and the value of green energy as a power to the minting of coins.
I think green energy is a complete scam. And I think a lot of countries are figuring this out as their power grids go down, as all of these giant boondoggles, the wind farms and solar energy and stuff, it's not returning the same amount of power that they need. And they're seeing their energy costs rise. They're seeing a lot of land being used for that stuff that isn't very productive. Just like the materials that you need for like a wind turbine, for example, you need some significant amount of concrete, and the energy needed to get the concrete there and mix it and stuff, it's not net positive at all. Ultimately, you're wasting energy to do all of these boondoggles. And the fact is, like you haven't seen a country be more energy secure as a result of green energy anywhere in the world, because it's too intermittent and it doesn't produce the right energy at the right time. And that's unfortunate. But that's the reality that a lot of governments are going to have to face up to in like the next 20 years, because there's way more brownouts, and energy costs are going through the roof and so on. This is a reality that people can feel, and you can push green policies all you want, but they have this has consequences, and the consequences are coming on through. I think it's a waste of time trying to convince politicians that this is actually greener. Bitcoin is actually greener than you think. I'm not willing to even concede that green energy is something that we want to do. Now, it is true that Bitcoin ultimately saves a lot of these boondoggle projects, because it can take demand when no one else wants it and so on. But I think that's the wrong framing of the issue. I don't think people understand energy at all. They think, okay, you generate some amount of power, and it doesn't matter what source it comes from. It does, because some of it's intermittent and some of it's not. Uh, and a lot of politicians are under the delusion that if you only had wind turbines and solar panels, that everything would be fine. Actually, it would be much, much worse, because you would only have electricity for part of the day, because these are intermittent sources of energy. Um, so I don't like conceding any of that. And I think it's a waste of time trying to do that. And I get it. There's a lot of, lot written about this stuff to try to convince people on those own terms. And, I mean, it's not that they're invalid or anything. They're perfectly valid. It's just that I think it's a waste of time. These are not people that are thinking rationally in the first place, if they are supporting stuff like wind and solar, because those are not good technologies. They're very inefficient, and they're full of rent seekers, and they don't produce, they make everything worse. Now, if they're going to talk about nuclear or something, then I might try to convince them, right? Like then it's worthwhile having a dialogue, because they're thinking rationally. Because nuclear power takes up very little space, relatively speaking, produces way more power, and adds a lot of energy security without that much pollution. I mean, it's an amazing technology. If they're talking about that, then I'm willing to engage with, okay, yeah, Bitcoin can help your nuclear power plant run way better, because it'll take energy when no one else wants it, because at least the way nuclear power works, it's a constant amount of energy all the time. But like the green energy stuff, it's a complete boondoggle. There's a lot of politicians and governments that will have tremendous egg on their face in the next 10 or 20 years, as like the costs of these things get exposed. And there's so much cost, put into, so much investment that went into these things, that didn't make any sense at all. Like the lifetime of wind turbine is 30 years. The amount of energy that it generates over that time is extremely intermittent. And the energy that you use to go and build that is like a significant percentage of the energy that it's going to generate anyway. It's stupid. And until people understand that, I'm not willing to engage at that level.
It's very clear. So, do you think that, for instance, artificial intelligence can push the path towards nuclear fusion? And I also wish there could be more capital allocation and resources in science, in terms of science and scholars, to reach the nuclear fusion, because it will change the world. So maybe we are in a transition phase where until that doesn't happen, and we should redirect our energy, our efforts toward to make it happen. And I agree on that. If that's your position, that's correct.
Well, I'm going to disagree with you on the nuclear fusion, because I don't think that's the technology that's anywhere near ready. And I'm not even sure if it'll ever be ready. The nuclear technology that we have right now, fission based, and not necessarily even using the double water cooling, there's enormous potential there. Like nuclear power is so abundant, and like if you compare it to something like coal, a can of Coke worth of coal can heat a household for about 4 hours. A can of Coke worth of uranium can, supply the energy needs of a household for an entire year. I mean, this is orders of magnitude stuff. And all of that stopped developing in the 70s, largely because of fiat money. Because the lobbies that already were existing wanted to keep their grip going and so on. Instead of going down nuclear, we went down this other hole of let's go green or whatever. And it's been a disaster for civilization, because we have higher energy costs than before. we have all this land use that's used in a very terrible way, and we've wasted a ton of capital and resources. What we should have done is build a lot more nuclear power plants, especially in the developing world, where they could really use that constant electricity. If you think about just like the hospitals in a lot of developing countries, they don't have steady power, so a lot of people end up dying because the machines that are keeping them alive can't operate 24/7. And this is ridiculous that something as powerful as nuclear is being kept from these developing countries in the name of safety, in the name of being green or whatever. When really it could have been saving a lot of these people, developing a lot of these countries, giving economic opportunity to humanity. Um, Now, as far as fusion goes, we've been talking about some form of fusion energy for the last 40 years. And for me, that's a good indicator that it's more hype than substance. Because we've been also hearing about quantum and nanotech for 40 years and nothing's happened there either. And the reason why it happens that way is because a lot of rent seekers get into these positions, and they get into these positions as the expert in X, whether that's nuclear fusion or quantum computing or nanotechnology or whatever. And if they just went and said, "Oh, you know what? There's no future in this field," they would get fired. So they're incentivized instead to say, "Oh, it's just around the corner. It's like 10 years away. It's 20 years away." And lo and behold, nothing ever happens because these are not promising technologies. These are not technologies that are actually working. They're written about like there's something about to happen all the time, because that's what the incentives of the people that are promoting this stuff are.
I agree. Nuclear wasn't used as it should have been, and that's a bit. Now we understood. You explained why, according to you, that makes sense. So we are going to close this space, and I wanted to thank you for having informed our audience with all of these interesting features and aspects of Bitcoin as a whole, given your background, especially as a technical and also advocate of it. Thank you very much, and maybe see you in the foreseeable future for another space. And Alessandro, do you have any comment and closing remark from your side? Thank you.
Yes, it was great to hear from you, Jimmy, especially from the technical side. That this the part of the banks on the community banks is really great development when it happens. And maybe I will have just one short question. Before I wanted to make a question, but it was on mute. One comment on, and then with the closing remarks. One comment in one of your posts on Nostra, because I shared it, I agreed with this. You said, I wish to see more people with suits, so dressed more elegant or less casual in Bitcoin conferences. One comment on that in the closing remarks, because I totally agree with this, especially now that we are going to the global adoption. It would be better for the Bitcoin community if it shows also with more, let's say, appropriate clothes when educating people.
Sorry, I didn't hear the question because I was being moved up to the stage and it mused out for a second.
I reshared one of your posts from Nostra, where after the Bitcoin Prague, you said, I wish to see more people in suits, so more elegant dressed in a Bitcoin conference. I would share the same. If it's not so, maybe so elegant like suits, at least a casual business. So one comment on the post that you made.
Yeah, I mean, I just want us to project the right image, and I get it. A lot of people, like especially from the banking world or the lawyer world or whatever, they're used to like dressing up for work, and they're like that's the thing that they want to get away from, so they don't dress nice. I just think it's important to project the right sort of like image, and to where like the image that a lot of people have of Bitcoiners is that like slovenly programmer that's eating potato chips and drinking Coke and wearing sneakers and jeans to everything. And I mean I don't think that's who we are, at least at this point in the life cycle of Bitcoin. There's a lot of people that have families that are you know that have some money that are doing different things, and the culture that we've taken on by going away from like the bankers and lawyers is that of Silicon Valley, and I don't think that's a great model either. I'd like to see people dressed better, not necessarily in like the banker suit, but maybe something that's like more fashionable. I think it would be I think it would be better representing who we are as like sort of low time preference people.
Thanks for sharing, and I totally agree with this. Now, if you can give some closing remarks to the listeners of this X space that will also become a YouTube and Spotify video.
Sure. So the final thing that I will say is that Bitcoin really does change your life, and you really have to experience it for yourself. And there's a lot of people that have been in it a year and they think it changes their life, that have been in it 3 years that think, oh, okay, this has really changed my life. Try 10 years, right? Like
let's imagine Bitcoin as a suit you have to tailor to yourself to make you look very well when you will able to do it, and that's I will see it. Thank you, Jimmy, and to the audience and to the listeners. It was amazing, and see you next time. Bye.
Thanks, Jimmy. Thanks, Francesco. Bye.
Thank you.